Changing bike tyres can be a dirty and a really frustrating job, so I'm going to show you how to make it as quick and easy as possible. Job number one is to let the tyre down, but also identify what type of tyre setup you have, so tubeless or with inner tubes. A real giveaway, as you'll see on this wheel, is a jazzy coloured tubeless valve. That is a dead giveaway that I've got a tubeless setup on this bike. If they are just a drab silver, then it's very likely that you've got a tube setup, although not on 100% certain. But the easiest way to do this is if you just undo that lock ring a little bit, so the thing that's holding that valve onto the rim, and then if you push it and it lets some air out, then you've definitely got a tubeless setup. If it doesn't really do anything, then you've probably got the old school inner tube. It doesn't really matter for now. Let's try and get the air out of that tyre. Obviously, if you know you've got tubeless tyres, you can skip that step. So, time to let the tyre down. You can either just remove your dust cap and push in the valve, or I would now recommend, if you do have tubeless, time to remove that valve core. So you'll either need one of these valve core removal tools, or you might find that your tubeless valves actually come with one. So these PT's valves come with a spoke key on one of the dust caps and a valve core removal tool on the other, which is super handy. So you stick it over and give it a few twists, and then it'll come out super easily by, don't let it fly across the room. Hold on to that, put it somewhere safe, but just remove that for now. Obviously that'll let all the air out super quick. Make sure you've got a good variety of tyre levers in your toolbox. You can often change bike tyres without using these, but they are super handy on some occasions. And I would say try and avoid using things like, you know, spoons or any metal type of screwdrivers, things like that. You can maybe use them if you're completely in a pickle and you're stranded somewhere, but often they'll cause damage to your rims or even your inner tubes. Like I said, I would probably avoid some of the cheaper ones, these as well. They can bend and break, although that is a surefire sign that you're not doing it quite correctly. More on that later. So now let's try and take this tyre off the rim. The real trick to getting your tyre off as easy as possible is trying to force the bead of the tyre into the middle of the rim. So the bead of the tyre is the bit that sits just inside here, and when you pump the tyre up, it sits directly in contact with that rim wall. But actually, if you look at the profile of this rim, if you push it into the middle, it gets a smaller diameter, so there will be much more slack in the tyre if you can do that. If you ever find that your tyre feels really tight and you're really forcing a tyre lever in there, then you haven't got the bead far enough into the middle of the rim. Now, if you've got a chunky inner tube or you've got a tyre insert, that can become more difficult, but it's even more essential. You need to try and make that tyre slack so it can come off the rim nice and easily. So although the tyre is flat, you can still see it's still sort of pushed up tightly against the rim, which is great. For tubeless tyres, that's what you want. It's that sort of seal of that tyre against the rim that helps your tyre pump up. But now you need to try and what you call break the bead. So push the tyre off there and into the rim. You might find the first time, the first one, takes a bit of force. So get your thumbs into the back of it, push hard, and that tyre, there you go, you can hear it go. It's slipped now into the middle of the rim. And now I'll just go around. I'm being kind of careful because the tubeless setup, I've got a load of sealant in there that can go sticky on my new chinos. So I'm just going round and it's slack all the way around. And that really is the best trick, to make sure you go all the way around the tyre and get it into the middle. That's going to make your life as easy as possible. Now, you might get away with actually just pulling that tyre off now. You might not need a tyre lever. I reckon this is fairly slack, so I could do that. But I'm going to show you how to do it with the tyre lever. So you may not have noticed, but a lot of tyre levers have these kind of grooves on the top end, and that will hook around a spoke. So get your first tyre lever in. See if I'm pulling that tyre back. It's super slack already. So it's going to come off fairly easily, this tyre. And I'll get the tyre lever in quite near a spoke. So I'll hook that over. And see that goes around the back of the spoke, gives you your two hands free. So you can either grab another tyre lever, or in this case, like I say, it's pretty slack. Once you've got that one side of the tyre off, job's good. It's now pretty easy just to pull the tyre off. Or if you've got a tube now, sort of unravel the tube, you know, pull the valve out and away you go, pull the tyre straight off. The other side should come off pretty easily once you've got the one side off. Occasionally, if it's a super tight tyre, you might need to do a bit of the same again, make sure it's in the middle and get a tyre lever involved, but I doubt it. If you've got tubeless now and you're putting a new tyre on, I would pause before you pull the whole tyre off the rim. There is some tubeless sealant in the bottom of there. Now, often you can reuse it, depending on how old it is. If it looks nice and clean, then great. What I will do is scoop that out and reuse it in my new tyre. Probably have to top it up because you won't get all of it out. Some of it still sticks to the inside of the tyre. However, if you look at it and it looks a bit kind of weird, sometimes it can go a bit watery and a bit milky, or you'll get kind of lumps of rubber. If it's been in there for a long time, it kind of rolls around and congeals and turns into lumps of rubber. Obviously, then get rid of it. You have to refresh it, but often you can just reuse it. So a nice little trick for this, to reuse it, what I do is grab a cap off the top of an aerosol can, and that kind of fits the shape perfectly, and go around and get as much of that sealant out as possible. If you've got tubeless tyres and that you found possibly a little bit harder to pump your tyres up, or when you come to let air out of them, that it's a bit slow coming out, then it could be that your valve has got a little bit clogged up, so some of that sort of sealant has got in there and started to almost seal that hole up. So now would be a great time to remove your valve, get something on it like a degreaser, spray it inside it, possibly use something like a piece of wire or something pokey just to clean it out and make sure it gives you a good free flow, because that's going to help you when it comes to pumping the tyre back up. All right, when it comes to putting your fresh tyre on, or putting your old tyre back on, like I'm about to do, again, I like to do it kind of one side of the tyre at a time. But first things first, make sure you get it on the right way round. So tyres will have an arrow, it says rotation that way. So I like to keep everything sort of drive side, as if I'm sat on top of the bike. So disc goes on the left-hand side, the rotation is that way. So ahead of me, of course. And now, super importantly, not really, but being pedantic, I will line up the tyre logos with my valve to make it look super neat. So I'll do that on the back as well. And then work around getting that one bead of the tyre into the middle of the rim. Okay, so first side on, nice and slack. I'll now start getting the second one on and go almost all the way around. Now this is quite, like I said, it's enduro tyre, so it's quite a chunky tyre. There's a bit of weight to it. It keeps its shape quite nicely. So I'll get around until it's almost done, but then I'll leave that last bit of bead off, and then that's where I'll put my tubeless sealant in. I find that is the sort of cleanest, easiest way of doing it. You can always put it through the valve. You'll see a lot of bottles come with that sort of the top of it, so you can squeeze it in through there. Quite often I find if I'm filling a tyre up with it that way, you're putting quite a lot of sealant in, you'll push through and it'll be quite hard work, and it'll kind of fire back at you when you have to take it off, and it can cause a bit of mess. So I'd much rather just pour it in down the side of that bead. So you want to give this a good shake before you start pouring it in. You'll be able to find the quantity of how much you need on the bottle, I'm sure. So it says here 29 on mountain bike, 100 to 120 millilitres. Okay, so now we're on to the bit, again, that might need a bit of force. So what I do is I pick that up and rotate it round. So now, as you can imagine, the sealant is sat down here somewhere, so it won't come out of that tyre very easily. First thing I'll do is I'll see how tight it is. If I can get the tyre bead over and on, like it is already set up, then great, because you can see that actually the bead of the tyre is sat against the rim quite nicely, which makes it harder to get it on, but easier to pump it up because you'll have a better seal already. So first things first, I'll see how tight it is. And it is a bit too tight. I'm not gonna be able to get there very easily. So I'll go back to that same method. I'll pull that bead into the middle of the rim. If it's super duper tight, then it's time for the tyre lever. But again, if I can get away without it, which I definitely can, there you go, then I'd much rather do that. So give that a bit of a clean. But actually now it's time for pumping up the tyre. Because we left that valve core out, you can pump this tyre up really easily. You can get really good airflow through there, which is important. If your tyres are a bit hard to get sealed, then I would do that method first. Get it so you pump it up hard, it'll pop onto the tyre. And then obviously you're gonna have to take the pump off and it's gonna go down again, but hopefully it'll still keep the bead on that rim. So you've still got the seal. You can then put your valve core back in and away you go. Or you can use one of these super clever pumps that we've got here from Toe Peak that has this valve core removal tool built actually into the head of the pump. So you can do sort of two jobs in one here. if you actually put that valve core in there and then put that on the valve, you get the benefits of that valve core not being attached to it so far, so I can get really good airflow through it. And then when you actually get it pumped up, you can then screw the valve core in using that very handy little tool. You often have to pump your tyre up to 40 or 50 PSI to get it to pop so the bead goes onto that rim. Obviously it can make a surprising noise, but it's normally okay. Don't go too much above that. Some rims have like a recommended maximum pressure, so don't go too mad with it. Easy way to see if you've done it properly is a lot of tyres have this kind of little rubber seam almost. You can see if that sits parallel to the rim, then it's almost certainly popped properly. The other way, of course, is just to put your wheel in and give it a spin. If you've got weird bulges in your tyre, like it does funny things with spinning, then it isn't sat properly on the rim. So if you're already up at 50 PSI, I would maybe lower it down and try and move it around by hand to get it right in place properly. But normally it just needs a few more PSI and it's going to pop nicely onto the rim. You may have got some tubeless sealant onto the rim or even gone everywhere else over your hubs or things like that. So now is the time to wash it off thoroughly with a bit of water, get a brush out and then dry it, especially if it's on your clothes as well, because it's really clever stuff, but it can ruin clothes. So make sure you get it off anything straight away. Otherwise it'll dry into kind of glue, doing what it's supposed to do. You know, it's supposed to be like gluey sealant stuff. So get it off your bike and off your kit. If during that process you can't get your tyre to seal, so you're pumping it up but it's not doing anything, first thing, make sure that your tyre bead is sat outside of that valve. Sometimes if you're pushing the tyre on, you can actually get that bead so it's sat on the other side, so both sides of the bead are on the one side of that valve, so it's just pushing air straight out the side. Or you might need to try and make your sort of rim and tyre tighter. So the way to do that is to get some more rim tape and wrap another sort of circumference around, and that should tighten things up and make it easier to seal. Also, I would say make sure you've got a track pump. These are brilliant investments. These last a lifetime pretty much. Most of these have replaceable parts, so if they get worn out or broken, you can replace the ends of them and they last a lifetime. I tend to actually save my CO2 canisters for out on the trail, but sometimes you can use those to kind of give you that quick blast to seal that tyre, but I'd much rather get it right with one of these and not waste the CO2 canister. If you have a tube set up, now I would undo that valve and go around squishing the tyre, trying to get just as much air of that out of that tube as possible. It's going to make your life that little bit easier. So squashing the tyre all the way around into the middle of the rim. I can feel the inner tube in there, so there's a bit of stuff to work around. Obviously you can see it as well if we pull it high enough. So what you want to do is try and get enough slack by getting that tyre into the middle so that you can safely get a tyre lever just under that bead of the rim and make sure you're not pinching any of the tube. Even if you're using a tyre lever, you can still pinch it really easily. If you're using a spoon or a screwdriver, you're almost certainly going to stick it through it. So make sure you just catch the lip of the tyre and then pull that over and hook it onto the rim. Hopefully now you should have enough slack to just safely peel that bead over the edge of the rim. And there we go. I'll then take that one side of the tyre off and actually pull the inner tube out. Obviously you've got to pull the valve out the hole and put that tube aside for now. With one side off and the other side now in the middle of the rim, you just grab the tyre, pull up and then sideways, and it will almost certainly just come straight off. So now putting your new tyre on with a tube set up is nice and clean at least. So get your rim hole lined up with the tyre logo to make it look nice. Put your wheel into the middle of the tyre and then go around and just get that one side of the tyre back on. Simply just using your thumbs. As long as you get it into the middle of the rim, it should be relatively easy, and you literally sort of peel it over. And there you go, one side on. Try and make sure the tyre is now sort of back into shape. Get that carcass ready. Get your inner tube, and first thing I would do is get the valve into the hole. Now the important part is to get your inner tube sat inside that tyre, but also inside the rim so you don't pinch it. So there's a couple of schools of thought on this. Some people like to put a bit of air into the inner tube. Some people like to do it with it flat and kind of just fold it in. Don't think it really matters, to be honest. There's a little bit of air in this tube. All you need to do is make sure it is sat nicely inside. So when you start putting this bead back into the rim, it's easy to begin with, obviously, because you've got a lot of slack. So I'm just pulling it over and I can see down here the tube is sat nice and far down into the tyre. It's when things get tighter, then that's when it gets more important. You obviously need to make sure, push your fingers in. I can feel that inner tube is nice and far in. And also when you're going round, sometimes you might see actually a bit of tube poking out of the outside of the bead. So I would take it back off and go around and make sure it's inside the tyre. This tyre is pretty slack, so I don't need to risk it, because the risk here is if you get a tyre lever now and jam it in there, that it might actually pinch that inner tube against that rim wall, and as you pull it over, it's just going to rip a hole in the side of it, so then you have to start again. So you just have to go around over and over, making sure that you're not going to pinch that tube. Like I say, if you're using your fingers, it's very, very unlikely you're going to pinch the tube putting it in. As you can see, I'm all the way around. Again, I can push the slack, push the tyre into the middle of the rim, make it a bit more slack, and I'm still peeling the tyre over like that, and I can just push that bead over, and away I go. So there you go, there's how to change a bike tyre easily. I think the most common mistakes to try and avoid is getting too gung-ho with your tyre levers and pinching your inner tubes. That's super annoying. If you've done all the work, you pump it up, it goes down again. And also, really annoyingly, putting your tyre on the wrong way round. So make sure you double check the rotation before you put your tyre on and pump it up. But there you go, I'm ready to roll yet again. Make sure you subscribe to GMBN for more helpful videos like this.